Hey there, welcome along to this week's episode where myself and Gavin, we're talking about phone use, self-confidence and comparison and how they're all interlinked. All right, Gav, so let's get to it.
How are you, Dave?
Keep them well, keep them well. We have a good topic tonight.
Yeah.
So, phone use. We're going to start this evening by talking about how it shows up from what conversations we've had with parents. And one of the things I've seen show up is that for parents, they sometimes see their kid just get so engrossed with the phone and that it seems to be their world. And it seems to be, we're in a society where self-worth can be linked to how many followers you have. If you post something and it gets a lot of likes, that's deemed as all good. And in terms of the validation from it, that confidence seems to be wrapped up with social media and with phone use. What do you think?
Yeah, I think especially at such a young age when you are surrounded by, I want to say 24 hours a day, but when you're surrounded by social ideals, it can be very, very, let's call it pulling for teenagers and younger people. So it's definitely an issue. And as we said before, I really feel when we classify it or how we classify it being like, is it an issue? Is it a problem? Or is it a really meaningful stress test that we're getting earlier than we may have got one before?
Gotcha. And
Um,
to
we,
just ask for, like, I always like to
yeah,
think how it maps to the past and how it maps to now. Like, let's just say if the phones had never come out or social media or all the time internet, all that stuff hadn't come out,
yeah, yeah.
what would have been the equivalent, do you feel, back in the day? Like, I think to that.
Is it magazines, Dave? Is it like, whereby, they start opening up magazines and they start seeing, the airbrush pictures? I know back when I was younger, I hear people talking about airbrush, oh, that's not real, that's airbrush. You know what I mean? I think possibly that was something, but again, like we didn't come in contact that till we were, a lot older. We weren't really coming in contact when we were 13, 14, 15 to the same degree.
Hmm.
Um, and then, I think maybe children in the cities, because everything was much more dense, they were saturated with much more young people. So the city kids always were the cooler kids. They kind of they knew the fashion more so than some of the kids that live in the country, like myself. So I
Hmm.
think that's another example of it, and the reason for that is probably because in the city you are surrounded by much more people of your own age, and so that's probably the little evolution of it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like, because when I think of it, like, I was thinking about before we hit record, I was thinking about like what I used to compare, like back in the day, because it wasn't social media, but it'd be perhaps like if somebody had something that you didn't, like the comparison, the instinct to compare has always been there. But it seems with social media, it's way more of a hot topic.
But just on that, it's really interesting because mine would have been sport, big time. It would have
Mm,
been one of my highest values. And the thing with the comparison is, I suppose you're seeing a more, because it's real life, you're seeing a more holistic view of it. So whilst you're comparing, it's not like, in social media now, you're being bombarded by one side and it's been made look like glitz and glamour and there's different filters on it and there's sparkles on it. So it's a much more one-sided reality that we're getting nowadays than when we did when we were okay. You're comparing yourself against sport, but you were able to see the person a little bit more rounded to a degree. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it does. And you're also around friends. Like, I remember if I perceived something as missing or was comparing something, I was probably around friends as well who perceived the same thing. But with phone use, for a lot of kids, they're on their own looking
I
at
think
stuff.
that's Dave. I think
You
that's a
know.
really good point because I do think that a lot of the time when if you're with your mates, it's nearly like an instant processing. And maybe I know I was speaking to a young girl um, last week, and one of the things that she was talking about was that her friend group are so important for nearly talking out problems as they occur. And I think that if a judgment happens and there's people around you, maybe that talking maybe came and it was a little processing. But I think that's a really good point that I think when you're on your own, It's very it's internal. You're looking at it. There's no one around you to kind of maybe process things with,
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And with it then, let's just say, so can't put what's the saying, put the genie back in the bottle. Phones are here,
Yeah, yeah,
social media is here, and just as like 10, 15 years ago when Facebook was the villain of social media, then it merged into Instagram and images. Now it's TikTok and short form video and the effects it has on the brain. Like a new thing will always emerge.
yeah,
And I think it's important that we learn how to equip ourselves because the new thing will come, whether it's AI or whatever, the next thing that we don't even
yeah,
know about.
yeah.
So, like in your experience, what are some useful things that somebody could do?
Well, I just before we even move on to that, I think a really useful analogy to that, because I think it's really important to be grounded in the fact that the phone is not the problem and we can't escape it. And I think we need to accept that and go, as you just said, and use it's totally exposing. It's a mirror. And I think this frame is really important. And I know we've said this before, but if we literally totally accept, this is a frame and it's exposing something. And we nearly contrast this. I was speaking to someone the other day and we used this example. Imagine, let's say, for example, you've never done any running in your life before. And suddenly you start and you go out and do a 5K. And suddenly you get a tight hamstring or you get a tight muscle in your foot. The running is not the problem. It's been introduced to your life. And we see, oh, the running, it's like the phone. The running is not the problem. It's just exposed something in us that hasn't been conditioned. And the phone does the exact same. It exposes something in us that hasn't been conditioned yet, that hasn't been given focused attention yet. And I think that frame is so important, and from which we move on with, because then we have something to work with, as opposed to half trying to run away from it and half trying to fix it. We can kind of go, no, this is what it's showing us. Now we have a job to do.
Got it. Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. And say with the phone, so something shows up,
Mhm.
and it's feedback. And let's just say, so we said this evening talking about self-confidence and comparison, and like it's the comparison that affects the self-confidence. So let's say we'll talk about the comparison piece first. So,
But just, Dave, even
mm,
on that, just break down what you just said there. It's the confidence, it's the comparison that affects the confidence. Like, even to understand why that happens is even an interesting one, because I know it just rolls off the tongue there.
mm,
But even if we just, even on that little tiny piece, and go understand that confidence just means with trust. So con means with and fidence means trust. So if you say comparison affects self-trust, well, that's now we've isolated something. Now we go, okay, so what is it that I'm not trusting, and why am I not trusting myself? And I think even that frame in and of itself is massively useful when you kind of move into the protocol or the framework that we kind of move into next. So you mentioned the feedback,
mm, yeah,
Does that make sense? Like that kind of, because the way you hear so much nowadays, oh, confident, I don't have any confidence, self-belief, but we never really give much thought to what do the words actually mean?
yeah, yeah,
Because when
no,
we just use them,
100%.
you know,
Yeah.
sorry, I got into your frame of thought there, Dave. I'm sorry.
No, no, you're good. You're good. I was thinking sometimes it is amazing though because like I talk in my line of work at times I'd also talk with guitarists and sometimes say I'm not confident and like the ironic thing like they're so confident that they're not confident. Like it's amazing, and the
Yeah,
confidence I think the lesson is you're confident with something
yeah.
when you look deep enough.
So, and you mentioned there, then, Dave. So, what's the structure? What's the structure when we see that and we've gained the feedback? So we kind of use the little FAR acronym for what
Mm,
do we do? Okay, so we can talk about this, but let's frame the whole problem, action, solution. Use the FAR acronym. So FAR is when we see something in our children, in our teenagers, in ourselves. The first thing when we see it, let's just call it feedback, because that's what it is. It's just feedback. The same way as if we put on a shoe that's too tight for us and our foot starts to blister, that is feedback that your runner is too tight. Now an action is required. So in any event that we see, let's call it what we're going to call as a systems one or an amygdala response, and not to kind of go down deep into it, but it's when we see distress. Is that a fair way of pointing it, Dave?
Okay, so with the phone, so I'm on my phone, I see,
Yeah.
and let's say I'm a teenager, and I see something, and I feel distress, or I feel it causes me distress, and that's
You feel a
some
judgment.
feedback.
You make a judgment. You've had it when you look at it. You have made a judgment which is causing you distress. It can be many different forms of de-stress, but let's just frame it as de-stress.
Mm.
So, what were you saying there in terms of where you were moving with that?
So I think cause me distress, disease, we'll say as well, and like our unease, and
Yeah.
looking at it then. So in that moment, I've seen something, and I've taken it in through my senses, through my eyes or through
Yeah.
my ears, and I'm feeling
Yeah.
something. And in that moment, so what's a choice I could have as a teenager to work with this piece of feedback?
So then we have the action, because so if we have an action, we have something that we can, okay, I know I can do something about this. If we don't have an action and we're confused, that creates more distress and more unease. So let's go, okay, what's our action? So if we have been trained, just like we're trained for healthy eating or whatever, and if we have a train and go, if I see something, the first thing is I go, okay, let's take the example of a real life example. A girl I worked with, and she said that her friend is so much more confident with her in terms of social situations. She can go up and start speaking to anybody and is not worried about the consequences. And she said that she has loads of confidence and I don't have any. So, feedback. That's the first thing. That's the judgment. I feel it. Okay, what's causing this? What's causing this? So then we go, okay, what's the action? Well, the action is we go and isolate what the judgment is. So we go, well, what am I labeling? What am I looking at? What is she doing through her actions? What is she doing that I'm labeling as confidence? Well, what is she doing? And this is the skill. This is the analytical piece where we engage the analytical mind. And we go, okay, well, she is approaching a group. She is making the first move, or she is, let's call it, she is making conversation, and she seems not to be concerned with consequences. There are the three things. There might be a fourth element in that.
Okay, so real quick. So let's say, okay, so in terms of framework here, it's like somebody sees something and it's causing them distress, we'll say. And then instead of it being big language or perhaps labels, it's a couple of questions are asked as like it's good for the teenager to ask themselves or be asked, like, what specifically is that person doing? What do you see them doing exactly? And get the sequence of exact events that the person is, what they're seeing, because the more details that they can pinpoint to that judgment, the more their awareness will open up to this. Is that what I'm hearing?
Let me make it even simpler. Isolate what are the actions and inactions that they're doing that I think I don't have. So that's literally it. What are they doing in the moment that I'm judging and I think I don't have? Instead of going, oh, they have confidence, I have no confidence. What are the actions that they're doing? Now, this is the really first bit, because now we engage the analytical brain and we don't stay in our fight and flight and try and run away from it. We go, okay, right, we're going to use this part. Okay, so then what we do next is, in part of the action, once we've isolated it, like those three things I am down, we go, okay, we follow one of the universal principles of human behavior, which is everybody displays every trait according to their own preferences, their own highest value.
Okay. Gonna put
Yeah,
on the brakes here a second.
I knew you were going to stop me there. I knew
So
you were going to
me
stop me
coming up
there.
to press the brake pedal there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so okay, perfect. So universal principle. So principle is something that always holds true.
Your
Oh,
mic is
sorry.
just a little off. You're okay.
Is it better there?
Yeah, yeah, perfect. Yeah,
Okay, I'll keep my chin up. So, um, principle is something that holds true no matter what. And that's
very good,
a
Dave.
basic definition.
Very good. Yeah,
Okay,
let's call it something that applies. It applies universally, and it can't be
excellent.
broken.
And this is a principle that we give a heads up, or I don't know how we'll call it, a shout out to Dr. John DeMartini, who'd done how many decades of study in this field,
Yeah,
like to
absolutely.
uncover this principle.
Yeah, he's the leading human behaviorist in this field, over 50 years of study and massive contributions to this area.
Great. So like that, so that's where the principle came from, and there's a whole body of work to support it. Because
Absolutely. This is not,
it's like the first time I heard it, I know I was like, what? And it's when you
yeah,
go through the process yourself that you go,
yeah.
okay. Now, okay, so that's the principle. That's and how did you name it again, Gav, about the traits that
Everybody displays every trait equally. So, and this is the this is the profoundness of it. Because okay, first it's the theory, but once you do it and you see it, you go, oh my God, I cannot believe there was something I was so certain that I didn't have. But now, after me doing the work, I can absolutely see it. It's like eating an apple. I can now taste it. I now know what it is. Yeah.
really quick trait,
Yeah.
just to define trait, for anybody listening who might be familiar with the work.
So we go trait, action, or inaction. So a trait is something that you can see in somebody else. So it could be a physical trait even. But what we'll do is I would more concentrate on the action or the inaction. And how do we, it is literally as simple as something that your eyes can perceive somebody doing, nearly muscular movements. So as this girl walked into the social media, she walked in, you can see that. Her body was relaxed, you can see that. She opened conversation, you can see that. She seemed not to have any hesitancy or care about the consequences of what she can do. You can see that to a degree. Okay, you can make that assumption because she wasn't carrying away. So there are things that you can isolate. Now, once you get really good at that, now you have something to work on. But that also, even the process there shows you that how we label stuff so easily. So we basically get a load of these actions and actions and we label them. We just go, oh, that's what that is. I don't have that. So will I move on, Dave? Do you think?
Yeah, I just think it's important, like, just to say that, yeah, the label thing is huge. Like, as humans, we generalize and we distort information. We, what's the other one? We delete information. Like, it's in the language, literally, where you could say that, God, they're really confident. And if you saw somebody performing on a stage and somebody else could agree with you completely, and both you could feel like you're making complete sense, but where this really comes into its own is if somebody's feeling distress, like a teenager is feeling distress, they're on their phone, they're on social media, and all the, let's say, supportive literature will use the big words like confidence, like all the other ones. And it is important to build that skill of becoming a detective kind of, and just digging into what is that label? What exactly is it in that moment?
It's such a good point, Dave. And to be honest with you, because I'm doing this so long, I nearly kind of overlook that, because if you look at the general things when people come to you with a problem, they come to you with a label.
Yeah.
And it's a label that they either have too much of or have too little of. And then they either want to impulsively seek that, I really need this, anxiety, or I need to run away from that, anxiety. And I think one of the first steps of kind of going, okay, well, what is this label made up of? That's only the first part of it, though, of part of that. So like isolating the label, that's all well and good. But once you have that, then you can go to the next piece of the work. And the next piece of the work is to go, okay, and take it one step at a time. Okay, so where do I do the first action in my life? So, well, let's give a simple example. So the girl that we were working with, we were, and this is why I know, Dave, we've spoken a lot about hierarchy of values, but we already knew what this girl was really interested in at this stage. I'd done a session or two with her, so we already knew what she kind of really loved to do. And so we said, I had a good idea that this girl was, you didn't mess with her when it came to her friends. You could see, like, I knew that just talking to her. And I just said to her, okay, so have you ever stood up for any of your friends before as a matter of interest in a group situation? And she looked at me and she smiled. She goes, I have. And I said, oh, okay. And we said, okay, so let's take the traits that you see in your friend here that she's demonstrating in this social environment. Let's apply them to your life. And we said, okay, have you ever approached someone in a social environment and said something to them without care of consequence? And I said, even in a confrontation type of way. And she smiled at me and she says, I have. And I said, okay, close your eyes. Go to when and where it was. And she described a situation where she was in a social situation. This guy had said something to her friend, and she went up in a social situation with a couple of girls around, a couple of guys around, and she approached the guy and she opened conversation. She said what she had to say. She didn't care about the consequences. And in that moment, she was like, the exact actions and inactions that she was judging herself on the friend, she now went, oh my God, they're there. But I just never recognized them in that form before. But she now recognized it. And I said to her, how meaningful was it for you to display them in that type? So are your friends very important to you? Was it important for you to stand up for your friends in that moment? Absolutely. How meaningful is it to you to go and approach in a social setting and approach and open conversations? Is that something that you like? No, not really. She kind of more like tight social circle. So I said, which is a more meaningful situation to you? Where you were standing up for your friends in the social environment, or the other one? She goes, no, absolutely this one. So then we spent maybe another half an hour isolating maybe around 10 more of these examples. And it was really amazing that, and this is what I mean about, this is not just theoretical. When she closed her eyes and went to the when and the where, and she started isolating the actions where she did it, what we call that is bringing the unconscious conscious. And when she did it, her body started to react. So her voice dropped. And I said, did you hear your voice drop? She goes, it did. And it became softer. And suddenly what she could see is, I said, can you see now that you have that which you judged your friend that you didn't have? Can you see that you display that exact same thing in the area that you value most? She says, I can. And in that moment, it was like tasting the apple. And that's applying the framework. And that's a result. I think that's a really powerful example of the FAR framework. Feedback. What's the feedback? We now do an action. The action is isolating, breaking the labels, isolating the actions and inactions, going to the area that we love most in our life, finding where we do that based on the principle that everyone has every trait, knowing that that's a true thing. And you don't need to believe it. By doing it, you'll see this to be true. And then what's the result? How do I feel? Do I feel any different? Do I actually now see and reflect? And now you have a feedback, action, reflect, result. And now you can see, and then we talk about confidence, Dave. And we said confidence means con, with, and feeding's trust. And now she sees that, can you see that you trust yourself in that area that was very meaningful to you? You showed it, and oh yeah. So this big label of confidence, we can see it's so fluid. It's not, it's just displayed according to meaning. Hope that wasn't, does that make sense there, Dave?
No, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think like it'd be cool to do a separate episode completely on the hierarchy of values, but so to bring it on home, let's say, okay, so phone is an external thing. Social media is an external thing that teenagers are observing through their senses, mostly through what they see, since everything's so visual now. And then when they see it, whatever label, and in tonight's call we talked about the label being like self-confidence, or like, just looking at those things and breaking it down into specific actions or inactions. What is it exactly? And then using those questions, somebody can uncover from the unconscious where they've done that in their life. And that could be through their entire timeline, depending on what age they are. and it could be across like 7 key areas of life, because it's important to, as you're doing the detective work, it's important to shine the light in different areas, because it's often hidden in some of those areas you never think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And and for people, I think it's really people to understand as well. Just like we talked about the athlete who, or not the athlete, the person who just began running and they figured out they have a tight tendon or a tight, to go, okay, now I must do some action to condition this muscle. And just like people will kind of go, oh yeah, there's actually a biological effect there when you condition the muscle. There's actually a biological, neurological effect when you start asking these questions. Because when you see something or perceive something in somebody else that you don't see in yourself, you drop into that amygdala. And that is the fight and flight. You try to chase something impulsively and you try to avoid something instinctively. But when we do what we've just said, we follow the framework, the blood, glucose, and oxygen doesn't go to the amygdala. It stays in the prefrontal advanced areas of the brain, which allow us to be present because we're not running from a past trauma into a future fantasy. And it allows to be analytical and much more objective. And I don't want to go too much more into that, but I think it's really fascinating for people to understand that there is actually a neurological, biological response to these questions.
Yeah, words are powerful. Alrighty, we'll wrap it up there, Gav. Thanks, Vinny, man. Brilliant stuff.
Okay,
And
well done. Thanks, Dave.
yeah, and anybody watching or listening, give us an email, drop us a comment below, and we will get back to you. And thanks for listening along this long. Take care.
Thanks, guys.